Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of Policy in Wonderland. I'm your host, Evie Amira, and thank you so much for joining me on the show again. Policy in Wonderland, the podcast where we dive deep into the complex topics of insurance and innovation. In today's episode, we have a unique opportunity to speak with a Professor Steve Pyne, one of the world's foremost experts on fire and environmental historian. Pyne coined the term Pyrocene, a concept that points to the era where fire has become a dominant force in shaping our planet, much like the ice ages or other geological periods. But before we talk about how to deal with fire disasters and build proper insurance coverage, we need to understand a fundamental question. What exactly is fire? How has fire influenced human and ecological history? And what is its significance in a time when wildfires are becoming more frequent and dangerous? In this episode, we will aim to uncover the deep roots of the fire phenomenon, learn what history can teach us about future fire management, and explore how these insights can help us build better risk management strategies insurance. So, without further ado, I want to invite my guest to join me as we go down the rabbit hole. Please welcome Professor Steve Pyne. Hey, Steve.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me
Okay.
today. And
Oh,
let's start for the like most exciting element that we know, fire. And but before we dive into the topic, I want to you to introduce yourself. You are a fire historian and a professor at Arizona State University, right?
right.
And
I'm retired. I'm emeritus professor now. So
emeritus, yeah.
yeah.
So and you also wrote several books about fire. I read recently the fire, a brief history, and
Okay.
my next one will be the Pyrocene. And
Okay.
the Pyrocene, I will say the full name, the Pyrocene, how we created an age of fire, and what happens next. Awesome.
Okay.
So Steve, tell us about your journey and especially how you research fire like
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 years.
Well, um, my entry into fire is entirely accidental. This is serendipity that changes a life. A few days after graduating from high school, 18 years old, I got a job at Grand Canyon National Park, the South Rim, which is the main visitor area, and I was just a laborer. And while I was signing my papers, the park got a call from one of the members of the North Rim forest fire crew and said he couldn't come. So they were anxious to fill it. There I was. Did I want to go to the North Rim? I'd never been there, had no experience of fire, did not know names of tools, had nothing. I was 18. I said, sure. And I did. I was completely enchanted. It was a totally different world for me. And I returned for 15 seasons on the North Rim crew. We were asked one time, a visitor saw us in our fire gear filled with soot and the rest, and said, "Are you guys hot shots?" And one of the crew guys said, "No, we're long shots." So we became the North Rim long shots, and I did that for 15 seasons, 12 as crew boss. And then later, I spent 3 summers writing fire plans for other national parks. So I learned fire on the ground. I never studied it at university. It was a good job for going to school. Fire seasons were shorter. So I would spend every summer on the North Rim. So did my undergraduate work, and then I went on to graduate school and then beyond. And I was eventually married, had one child, and finally, it's a job for young people. And even though I was a crew boss, I have paperwork to do with the rest. It's still out there, which I love, but the time had come. And then I eventually got an academic job. So I began writing about fire. And no one was thinking about fire in quite that way. I was trained as a historian. I really come out of the humanities, literature, history, other some little bits of art, history, philosophy, all the rest of it. I certainly read lots of science, but I'm not a scientist myself. So I had a unique perspective, both from my personal and my professional training, and I finally found a way to put them together.
Wow. So great combination. Let's ask a simple question. What is fire? Because when we talk about fire in the context of risk and insurance, it's crucial to understand the phenomenon itself. What is fire from your historical and ecological even perspective?
That is a great question, and in some ways is unanswerable. It really depends your reasons for asking it, because fire
Nice.
is a shapeshifter. It takes its character from its context. So its nature is postmodernist in a way, early on. Um, Fire is an ecological process. It's been on the earth as long as plants have been on land. So in that, and life created it. Life created the oxygen. Life created and organizes the fuels. And in the form of hominins, especially us now, life supplies most of the ignition. So in some sense, this is even the chemistry is a biochemistry. It takes apart what photosynthesis puts together. It's the same reaction that occurs in our cells when we eat and convert food into energy. So that's one way of looking at it. Another definition, the prevailing one for the West, is that it's a chemical reaction. And again, it takes apart carbohydrates, um, combines with oxygen, and we can isolate that reaction, and we can make tools out of it. We can
Mm.
put it in engines. We can do lots of things. So in that sense, fire is a tool, and it behaves in a certain way. But it's also a relationship, I think, for humans. And
And this is my next question.
it's probably our first domestication. And so that changes it. So what do you want for fire? If you want to know why houses burn, you want the physical description of fire. If you want to know how fire behaves in landscapes or at large on the planet, you need the biological. If you want
But,
to know how we should connect with fire, you really need that cultural relationship.
but right now we can't see of all these three topics emerge together
Yeah.
because you're not can isolate it anymore, right?
Yep.
Uh,
But we also get confused.
okay.
So there's a problem that was defined 40 years ago, beginning in California. It's called wildland urban interface. We can drop the interface. It's about the connection, the fire connection between countryside, not just wildlands, but the countryside and the and cities. And this was defined by the wildland community, and they saw the problem as growing suburbs and towns complicating their management of fire on large public lands, particularly, but the countryside generally.
Mhm.
And so that turns out to be a very difficult problem to deal with. But if you pick up the other end of that stick, say, well, okay, wildland urban, let's look, maybe this is really an urban fire problem with funny landscaping. If you define it as a wildland problem complicated by houses, it's very difficult to sort through because you've got a lot of competing cultural values and understandings. It's really difficult. If you define it as an urban fire problem with trees and odd vegetation around, it's pretty simple to solve because
Mhm.
we've solved this in the past. Urban fires don't happen in modern cities, developed countries, unless you have a war or an earthquake or something that just shatters the system, at least temporarily. So we misdefine the problem. So it really does matter how you think about fire and what the definition is. So your question was a very apt one.
Thank you. And this is very like when we are talk about fire and insurance, we talk about fire coverage and what will happen to your property once fire occurs or something like that. And especially in insurance, you must know history. You must know the history, not
Yeah.
about the geographical area or something, or you also need, especially about the elements that you are coverage for. If it's water, of course, if it's wind, and if it's earthquake, and fire is kind of, and we talked about it before. It's like the most unresearchable area in academic, right?
It disappeared. It was once one of the four elements. And then essentially the time oxygen is discovered, identified, then fire becomes combustion. It becomes a particular physical reaction. And it becomes something that you can put into machines like steam engines
Mm-hmm.
and you can make tools out of and so forth. At that point, there is nobody to talk about fire on the landscape or fire generally. And there is no academic group to study that for a long time. There are combustion engineers, there are people, do that kind of stuff, and there is some urban fire stuff, but there's really nobody to teach it. So the other ancient elements, earth, air, and water, all have academic disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
They have whole departments
Mm-hmm.
devoted to their study. The only fire department is the one that sends emergency vehicles. So it disappeared. The question we want wasn't studied. I mean, when I was in school, I never studied fire in a classroom because it was never taught. Now we do have courses. We're getting stuff. Finally, it's become a large enough topic that we're beginning to study it in a systematic way. But that's maybe over the last 25 years,
Wow.
30 years, seriously. So, yeah, so it was left. It was an accidental field for foresters. And what happened was that during the great
Mm.
European expansion, late 18th, 19th century, um, Europe expands, a lot of wreckage on contact because they're clearing lands and they're logging and they're leaving lots of debris slashed behind, and this is burning. And these caused huge fires throughout all of the major colonial settings. In the US, we had mega fires much larger and more lethal than what we've had in recent decades. So this was not climate driven. This was just by the amount of fuel and the role of railroads and throwing sparks and encouraging this kind of land clearing and all the rest of it. So there was an argument the state would have to intervene to stop this wreckage. It was killing people, it was destroying towns, it was breaking settlement. It was we were wasting natural resources. And so that became a large global program of conservation, the sustainability project of its day.
Mm-hmm.
And so fire was taken as an index of success with this because it's so graphic. If you can't control fire, what's the point? But as a result of that, foresters then become the oracles for fire, and they were not equipped to handle it at all. Central Europe is a terrible place to study fire because it has no natural basis there. It's one of the few anomalous places in the world. You don't have regular wet-dry cycles each year or over droughts. You don't have dry lightning. You don't have all the ingredients for natural fire. Of all the places in the world to create a science about fire in landscapes, this is probably the worst imaginable. So that then becomes the basis for French imperial forestry, for British imperial forestry. That is what Americans and Canadians and Australians and Russians take as their model, and it was totally hopeless. So anyway, they had to analyze fire so that they could control it and ideally eliminate it. They saw it simply as a problem of social disorder. Our first professional forester came from Prussia, a German tradition, married an American woman, came over and headed our early Bureau of Forestry. It didn't have any lands, but he looked over the American fire scene and he says it's all the result of bad habits and loose morals. Seeing it entirely, there's no natural basis for fire. Fire is just like malaria. If we could get rid of it, we would be better off. Now we've learned that having removed it, the removal of fire in many landscapes is the problem. And we spent in the US, we have a kind of origin story with fires in 1910. And since then, we spent half of that period trying to take fire out as much as we could. And we spent the other half trying to put good fire back in because we found out that removing fire made things worse.
I hate to stop it,
just tell me stop.
No, this is the problem. I can't. It's just okay. Too much interesting. What is a good fire? You
Well, let's start with
mentioned
bad
good fire.
fires. Bad fires are easy to
You know
identify.
what? Before that, even before that,
Yeah,
are we actually controlling fire right now? Do we succeed with this mission to control fire?
we are controlling fire in some settings and some fires. So we're pretty good at controlling fires in our houses, and we're pretty good at controlling fires in modern cities.
Mm-hmm.
We are not very good at controlling fire in the countryside or in parks, nature reserves, and other places that have a natural basis for fire or have a tradition of fire. And we're in a paradox that the worst of these mega fires, as they're called, the most damaging, um, are occurring in developed countries. So, yeah, Brazil, Indonesia, developing countries have large fires, but that is a part of a land clearing project. That is not necessarily wildfires.
Uh-huh.
The developed countries are the ones being hammered. Well, why is that? I mean, we have the most wealth, we have the most technology, we have the densest science. Extent of that. Why is it? Aren't those the things you would apply to remove fire? And yet these are the places that have it. And the problem was they used that equipment and knowledge and money to remove fire from places where it didn't need, where eliminating it was damaging. It just allows more stuff to grow up. It allows more fuel. It also causes a kind of dry rot ecologically. Stuff doesn't reproduce. The system doesn't work. This is an awkward economic metaphor. I'm not an economist, but if you think of how does fire work in nature's economy, well, it's the original creative destruction. It recycles, it renews. And if you eliminate fire, it's as though you took all your money around the country and you stuffed it into mattresses. Well, the whole economy starts slowing down because it's not circulating. The stuff's not being put to use. And that's sort of what happens with fire. So we also eliminated a lot of traditional knowledge, indigenous, not just indigenous, but also traditional knowledge in Europe. Europe had very extensive knowledge of fire because of agriculture. Almost every part of agriculture in Europe had some fire component, either for converting land or for renewing pasture, for grazing, or as a part of fallowing and rotating crops and fields. You needed fire. You needed that ecological jolt
So
at
this
some
is the
point.
good fire.
So these are fire history. This is all. This is part of our heritage, which we lost. These people were dismissed as ignorant. There is a strong tradition among European elites that open fire, unless it's in a candle or a hearth, is primitive. It's a stigma of backwardness. If you're modern, if you're rational, and these are the terms they would use, then you will find an alternative for it. So they wanted to eliminate it, and in some cases have by converting to fossil fuels. We found alternatives, and we didn't realize that converting to fossil fuels has its other side effects, namely that you're producing large amounts of greenhouse gases, which is then unmooring the climate and other problems, but it eliminated open fire. So again, all these efforts to eliminate fire, mindlessly eliminate fire because fire is somehow bad intrinsically, turn out to be an error. And even our efforts at fire retarding clothes and substances turn out to be carcinogenic as often as not, because fire is a part of the world. And in eliminating that, you create things that shouldn't be here, and in a sense cause problems. So let's go back to your good fire, bad fire
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
if that's okay. Yeah. So bad fire is easy. It kills people, it destroys houses, burns cities. Maybe it trashes municipal watersheds, which are very
yeah.
important for cities, and maybe special ecological, like sequoia groves. We have these wonderful mature sequoias. About 20% have been lost in the last 10 years to really high intensity fires, which is crazy because the sequoia is very well adapted to fire, but not that kind. So those are all
Oh.
bad fires. They would be good to eliminate. Good fires are the opposite. They enhance ecological integrity. They improve watersheds. They um, improve livelihoods, and they help to protect against bad fires because you're putting a controlled fire into this area that is going to burn, that needs to burn, that will burn, but you're doing it under your terms.
Okay, yeah.
So you've domesticated it, and we don't completely domesticate fire. I mean, this is part of it. It's like training a grizzly bear or a tiger, training a grizzly bear to dance. We can do it, but there's always that possibility that something's going to snap and it's going to go wild because fire is integrating everything around it, the wind and the humidity and the fuels, and we don't control all of that. If we build a house, we can control everything in that house. What goes where, what the material is like, how they interact, all those are under our control. So in theory, we have almost complete control over fire.
Fire.
But in nature, forget it. I mean, mountains, gorges, forests, prairies, winds, storms. I mean, we don't control this.
So
We
it's a
have
good.
found ways to do it, to work around it, but we don't have complete control.
So good fire is a domestic fire, or not necessarily?
Good fire. I'm sorry, I didn't. What kind of?
Is good fire is it relate to domestic fire?
Oh, yeah. I think it is a form of domestication. So we may domesticate um, sheep, but the sheep can go wild if we don't keep tending
Exactly.
them.
Okay. Wow. Um, um, I need to
I
stay
mean, it's
focused.
amazing that this isn't common knowledge to me. I mean, I'm astonished. I mean, we have our relationship to fire is so fundamental. But anyway,
It's so fundamental and yet so far away from like the from the day to day. It's not about again about the other elements, about water,
yeah,
about winds. It's we have there's a couple of good movies about fire, for example, but also about tornadoes, hurricanes, you name it. But the day to day to talk about fire and the relevance and what is a good and bad fire, what is the history of fire, what how is fire connected to the human history, and there is a lot of nuance that the like the regular ones not even familiar with, and I
yeah.
think it need to be like a general education or something because eventually
Yeah,
we need to domestic fire. We need to be in good relationship with fire.
and that's a great observation because in the developed world, fire is completely out of our normal lives. There may be a ceremonial fire, a birthday, candles for some ceremony, or maybe a ritual bonfire or something, but very contained, very controlled. Whereas in the past, even where my home right now would be filled with working fires. It
Mhm.
would be illuminated by fires of various kinds. I would be cooking my food over fires. I would be warming the house. Now, Phoenix, we don't want war very much of, but we would be doing even entertainment. You would use lantern slides. You could do. I mean, there were things there. You sit around a fire and tell stories, and
We have here in Israel,
people.
as a part of our religion, there is a holiday called Lag BaOmer, and we are fire. There is a like
There are fire ceremonies. I mean, even Halloween was a fire ceremony originally, and May
bonfires,
Day ceremony,
bonfires,
bonfires. Okay,
bonfires, bonfires, and
bonfires.
it's like you started to collect woods 2 months before, and you spend all the night surround the bonfires, and for me, again, I told you my old man is also as a firefighter, and it's so fascinating to look on that kind of animal that called fire, and it's frustrated in a way that you're not study about it, or you're not understand it more and more carefully as you need to know, especially when we talk about insurance, by the way, or risk in general.
Yeah, yeah.
um you know what, let's go back to insurance.
No, it's just, but even, I mean, fire is so graphic, it's so visual, it's so horrific in a sense when it's wild and
Mm-hmm.
explosive. But even from insurance, wind and water do far, far more damage than wind and fire. I mean, the hurricane we now have in the US,
Mm-hmm.
Helene, is going to cause 100 times more damage than the fires we've had. I mean, my guess, fires we've had in California recently, as bad as they were. Um, so the insurance companies have not paid attention because we managed to eliminate fire in many settings, but we didn't realize that over a longer term, sometimes short term, some long term, there are consequences to that we didn't understand. We just thought fire, we could do this, we could treat it. It was like, we'll eliminate polio. So now it's gone. We don't have to worry about it. And that's part of what happens with cities. They quit burning in modern world. So they quit paying attention to fire hygiene, if you will, to all the things you need to do. It got defined as a wildland setting with cute cabins and cottages in it rather than an urban setting surrounded by flammable vegetation.
I love the fire hygiene. um So while again you're not directly involved in the insurance industry, your expertise in fire and its history has a direct impact on how we assess disaster risk, as we already understand that. Do you think insurance companies today are properly evaluating the risk by fire disaster? It's like,
Yeah.
what lesson can we learn from fire history that could help up insurers and even insureds prepare for the future?
Well, I think there are several levels of answer in that. Uh, and one is we should look to urban fire insurance. I mean,
Hmm.
cities in places like the US during the settlement period burned as often as the surrounding countryside. They were made of the same materials. They responded to the same weather systems. Fires were all around because there were no alternatives to fire to do things. And so, but we eliminated that. And then I think we forgot. So how, and insurance was ineffective. So insurance companies needed to have cities burn in parts because that would encourage people to pay for fire insurance. But because the cities were not regulated for fire with fire in mind systematically, you could get large fires, which then bankrupt the insurance companies. And so nobody got anything else. So the system couldn't work. And eventually, governments had to step in and legislate standards for building, for fire protection, for fire infrastructure, so that you wouldn't have these explosive fires. And then the insurance companies could operate. They had some
Hmm.
predictability about it. Right now, we don't have that predictability. And
About
part of it is because,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, and part of it is climate change and other things are changing as well. But we really need to focus. I mean, dramatic as these fires coming out of forests are, and they approach cities, and you imagine that this tidal wave, this tsunami of flame, is overrunning the city and incinerating it. This is sort of Hollywood's version, and we see before, we see after.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how the fire works. And there's a lot of research now. We understand pretty well how houses start burning, and then if you get too many houses burning, it evolves into a conflagration. You can't control it. So how do houses burn? They burn primarily from embers. And you are looking at a blizzard of sparks, or to change a locust swarm equipped with fire sparks, and they just swarm into this place. And any point of vulnerability, any place that can be ignited, the embers are going to land there. They may or may not ignite it depending on condition, but you just have this immersion, this blizzard of sparks coming in, and that's it. And that is so you can identify. So what do you need? Well, you need to make sure your roof can't catch fire. That's pretty fundamental. But mesh, if you have vents for your attic
Mm-hmm.
or other compartments, the embers can get through there and then they burn inside. The embers will ignite vegetation that's right next to the house, to the structure. And I mean, you only need a meter and a half is plenty of clearance, and you prevent this. So that's it. And then you have, if your neighbors' houses, depending how close they are, if you take preventive measures, but they don't, you're still vulnerable. So that is how houses burn, and that is where you break the cycle, is targeting that. So it's not that we have to level whole cities and start over again. We can harden in specific areas at relatively inexpensive means and break the cycle. There's an analogy possible here. Think of fire as a contagion, which is how it spreads in a way. It's a combustion as a contagion. And so say we have COVID. This is the fire. Fire is COVID. So what do? Well, we wear masks to prevent aerosol spreading.
Okay.
Well, that's hardening the houses against embers. We practice social distancing. Well, that's clearing what's called defensible space around your structure. And it doesn't have to 6 feet. It's more than enough. And then you have to achieve herd immunity. And that is that enough structures have to do this that they're still, otherwise, if they don't, then they will catch fire, and their fires can cause spreads. And if you look at aerial views the next time you see a city burned in this way, you will see the city leveled. Cars have melted into pools of aluminum, and the trees are standing. The only trees that burned are trees that are next to houses because the house burned the tree, not the tree, the house. And the surrounding forest and the rest, they're adapted to fire. The city is not. So this is a very specific set of things, and it's well documented. And this is where you put your money. We don't have to remake whole landscapes. It's idiotic to try to eliminate all fires because we need fires. And to the extent that you eliminate fires, you only make the problem worse. So this is where we target it.
So what happened, for example, in the wildfires in the forest? You don't have any houses near to it. So if the trees adapted to fire in general, of course, but adapted to fires, how would this happen?
Well, we do a mix of things. Now, it used to be that every fire you immediately tried to suppress, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. That's okay in a city. It doesn't make any sense in the countryside. And so some places we have to put it out because it may throw sparks into an area we don't want to burn. Some places we will try to do our burning. We will do a prescribed burn, as it's called, and a controlled burn, or a series of control burns. So this is sort of domesticating. Instead of having a pack of wolves, we've got sheepdogs. We've changed the terms. And the other is working with wildfires. This has become very prominent in parts of the American West, certainly where I live in the Southwest. So more remote areas, they will, a fire starts and they will determine in advance where this fire might burn that would be useful. Because this is a way of getting some good fire back into the landscape. And so they will systematically work with that fire and try to find an area that they can control the fire so it doesn't escape out of its zone, but at the same time, it can produce some good fire and help prevent bad fire. So there are mixtures of things to do. But that's a different mentality than you see in a city. The city, you want to put it out as fast as possible. Your father would tell you that.
I also worked at the station, the fire department station. So I got a lot as a student. I got a lot of phone calls about we need to we have a fire tomorrow that we need to do a fire tomorrow, and please don't send any firefighters or something. And they controlled fire because there's domestic fire. And even though there was in the industrial fields or something like that, there is a lot of, again, the lack of understanding of fire and even how the fire departments even work. And this is
well,
this is a different topic.
Urban fire is one culture and one institution. When you go in the rural and wildland setting, totally different understandings, different values. The whole social and cultural context is different.
We had the Ice Age, right? And now we are facing the Age of Fire, as you pronounce it. Yeah. And in other words, what is the Pyrocene?
Yeah. Well, we talked about sort of the micro scale of houses and so forth. Now let's look at the planetary scale. And this is my contribution. We have gone through a series of ice ages, and things happen in ice ages. Ice expands, and biogeography shifts, and there are mass extinctions, sea level changes, and all these other sorts of, all kinds of other peripheral phenomenon. I think now we are creating the fire equivalent of an ice age, or what I call a Pyrocene, replacing the previous Pleistocene. And the Pyrocene, think about it, well, we have changes in climate, changes in sea level. Fire is replacing ice everywhere on the planet. We have mass extinctions, and we have the hominins in a new relationship to fire. So all the things we associate with ice ages, the large sort of characteristics, traits, we can now see happening with fire as the informing theme. So that is my concept, that it's not just learning to live with fire, as the saying goes in many places. We have to live with a fire age. And so for me, this does a couple of things. For one thing, it identifies the motive source for all this. It's humans and fire. That mutual assistance pact is becoming a Faustian bargain, unfortunately. We're turning our best friend into our worst enemy, but that is what's behind it. It's our bad combustion habits.
But
it also
popped me through my head. It's like there is a Disney movie, Elements, or Elementor.
Elemental, yeah.
Elemental, that the water became friend of the fire. So yeah, I just saw that in my imagination. So yeah. Nice. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I also think it helps to understand the scale of the project. And, we hear a lot about climate change, and climate affects everything and this, that, and the other. But suddenly, if you say an ice age, it sort of becomes tangible. Ice age, but with fire replacing ice. And suddenly all these other pieces seem to come into place. And there's an old saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And a model is really a metaphor with numbers. So I have a metaphor here, which I will propose. Maybe figures of speech instead of quantities. I'm not a math guy, but I think it really helps to understand that it's not just tinkering with this or tinkering with that. We're really in a wholesale makeover of the planet on the scale of the ice ages. So people say we have a no analog future. I think we do have an analog future. Take an ice age. We've broken the cycle of the ice ages, and we're replacing it with a fire age. And if we don't control that fire age, it will destroy us as easily as the ice. But
And as the dinosaurs, or I took it too far? Because
yeah.
eventually, I'm also a dinosaur freak, so it's kind
Oh,
of
okay.
so it's
Well,
kind. Yeah,
here's
go
an
ahead.
analogy. Things really changed. We humans had always used fire,
Right.
and we had changed where fire could occur, when it could occur, but there were always limits.
Hmm.
Fire had co-evolved with the living landscapes. So, but there were barriers. There if you push it too far, the system breaks, has to be repaired, rebuilt, and so forth. So there were checks and balances in it, and humans worked with that, changed it. But when we start burning fossil fuels, or what I think of as lithic landscapes, not living lithic landscapes, once
Okay.
living, now fossilized, um, there are no checks and balances.
Right.
We can burn day and night, winter, summer, whatever, it doesn't matter. So the problem is that the stuff has no place to go, the effluent. So we're taking stuff out of the geologic past, we're burning it in the present, and then releasing its consequences into the future. So if you're a dinosaur guy, I was thinking this is geology's version of Jurassic Park. So we take stuff out of deep time, we bring it to the present, release it, and then we have to deal with all these unanticipated consequences. And that's sort of, in a sense, what we've done.
Wow. I don't know how to react it to if to be optimistic or pessimistic. So wow, yeah. Okay.
Well,
You know what? Maybe. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no, I can be optimistic. I mean, fire is what we do. It is our role in the great chain of being. I mean, other animals knock over trees, dig holes in the ground, hunt. We do fire. So
Hmm.
yeah, we've abused that relationship.
We abuse
We've
it
misused it,
exactly.
but we can fix it. If we're faced with an ice age, there's not a lot we can do about the ice.
Hmm.
But
Do, do you
well,
see?
we are. We've warmed up the planet, so we've repelled that approaching ice age. But
Do you see
managing
opportunities?
fire
Yeah.
is what we do. This is our ecological signature, so we can do it if we wish.
Do you see opportunities in new technologies, for example, for us to help us to control fire?
I
Like,
don't know if there's always a role for technology, but technology can enable, but it doesn't advise you what to do with it. So new technologies can pervert as well as enhance. So uh, technological innovation only works if people if it if it if its social context and cultural context makes sense to improve. But most of what
yeah.
we need to do, if I could take the United States as an example, we already have the technology for it. We have the
Hmm.
knowledge for it. We just we just can't get a social consensus to act. And I did a graph a couple of years ago. I compared mass burnings of houses with mass shootings in this country.
Wow.
Obviously, the scale's different, but the graph looks eerily similar.
Wow.
And we just seem to be willing to take a lot of punishment before we're prepared to act to solve it. So it's a political issue ultimately, and it should be
Hmm.
in a democracy. But our political system doesn't seem to be working very well.
All over the world, I think.
Anyway,
So as we come to the end, to the end of the conversation, not to the end of the world or something like that. What final thoughts
Well,
would you like to share with us?
well, I'll say two, sort of the
Right.
disaster and the response, if you will. I imagine there are a lot of myths and theologies that have the world ending in fire. And usually the world is reborn out of that fire, which is what happens in nature. And for me, one way to think about what's happening now is that mythology is becoming ecology. It's happening. What we're seeing is a kind of slow motion Ragnarok, if you will. Instead of happening explosively and at 24 hours, the whole planet consumed in flame, we're doing it piecemeal over a longer period of time, but we are remaking the whole planet. This is what's going on. And then the optimistic is that, this is all our doing and we can fix it. We have the technology, we have the knowledge um, to repair, to begin to heal and do better. But we don't, we don't need wholly new technologies. We don't need wholly new sciences. We need to be able to understand fire and begin to work with it, make it our best friend again.
Couldn't end up. Wow. Yeah. Make it a good friend again. And it starts from the educational stage, and especially from you said that at the beginning of our chat is educational, like from the basic, from the kindergarten, how to behave and how to react and how to act to fire, for fire, and with fire. It's like it's so important, and this conversation explains the exact why. Uh, well, I would translate it to make it and this is there is even in their school, or I don't know how is it in the US, but even before this holiday in Israel that I told you about, just be careful around the bonfire and that's it. Not
Yeah.
what fire as human beings, what happened with fire, why we have fire, what how fire helped the humanity to become what it is, and
Well, there's
yeah,
some interesting research on that, which makes sense to me, which suggests that cooking was
right.
critical in hominid evolution. This is what gave the caloric boost, that little extra nudge that allowed us to get, big heads and small guts and all the rest of it. And we can't live off of off an uncooked diet completely. So it's in our genome. I mean, fire is a part of our DNA. That's how deeply interconnected we are with fire, and how we've perverted it this way is very strange. And you're right. I mean, it's not taught. We don't understand anything. It's either a tool, it's a threat, this, that, and the other. Okay. So I've had
Exactly.
this very peculiar relationship because I spent all these summers on a fire crew, and you don't personify fire, but you kind of animate it. So we talk about fires, this is a sweet fire. This was a really nasty fire. This was fun. Well, we had a great time on this fire. This fire was so existentially wretched, it shouldn't be allowed in the universe. And you talk about fire in that way. And so you develop a kind of sensibility. And that I was able to translate that into my writing of histories and so forth. And that's where that, but most people don't have that experience because we don't see fire anywhere.
No, no. Even though we see it on news, or this is from in the US or in Portugal or all over the world, and you're not kind of okay. We will pass to the next one and say like to the next item or something like that.
Yeah.
And there is no again academic or even on I don't know LinkedIn, TikTok, you name it for the younger generation of how
Yeah.
to behave and what is fire. Um, Steve, thank you very much. Professor, thank you very much.
You're welcome. This was fun
It was
conversation.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. I had so many questions to make me. Maybe we'll do like a second one, and just thank you for your time, and it was great to speak with you today.
Okay. Well, listen, have a good evening. I think it's the other half of
Yeah.
the day for you.
Right now
Yeah.
it's almost 6 p.m. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you
Well,
very
have a
much.
good evening and
Good morning.
take care.